had to happen sometime. You know, I've dealt with some squirrely Hofners in the last year or two. The collection wouldn't be complete without a 500/1. It's the one that keeps Hofner in business. Yeah, I said Hofner. I know that's not how your Bavarian uncle pronounces it, but he's not around very much these days and he doesn't pay me. Besides, we can just call this Hof, because that's all that's left of its glory years. Hoof? I don't see an umlaut there. Do you? Do you think they used a tall enough string spacer for the 0 fret? I mean, a lot of these actually end up disintegrating and falling away. It's surprising that this is still on there, given how tall it is. It's a lot of brittle plastic that could easily get knocked loose. For those of you not into guitars, music, or any combination of the two, this is the most iconic bass guitar of the 1960s. It was operated by one James Paul McCartney, alias Paul Ramon. If I need to tell you he's from the Beatles, it's time for you to leave. You're not ready for this material, go back to school, kid. The model here was conceptualized in 1955 by Walter Höfner and introduced to the Volk at the Frankfurt Music Fair the very next year. This is a lightweight instrument. It's fully hollow. The early ones had both pickups installed right up close to each other at the neck end of the body. In 1962, they moved one down to this end, providing more variety to the sound. McCartney picked his up in Hamburg in 1961, and it was special ordered there at the Steinway Music House because they didn't make a left-handed model, specifically, as a standard part of the line. The thing was, these were much less expensive than a Fender or some other solid body, and the shape just made more sense to flip over. You know, it's bilaterally symmetrical. It was also economical and within his reach, much less expensive than a Fender if he could have found one. Later in 1963, as the money started rolling in, he purchased another one of these as a backup, and that one was used throughout the Beatlemania days and sporadically ever after. So that's the reason people want these basses. And these are very typically Hofner. That is to say, there are idiosyncrasies and stuff that will drive a repair person nuts. This one is from 1965. You can imagine some horn-rimmed specimen with hair down to his eyebrows, or however long his parents would let him grow it. He's got a copy of the Beatles 65, or whatever outrageous assemblage of titles Capitol had under his arm at the time. And the bass will bring him the fame he needs to be just like those Liverpudlians he saw on TV. He knows the girls love Liverpudlian bassists. He wants the girls to love him too. Actually, this spent most of its life in, at that point, Yugoslavia and former Yugoslavia. It has just recently, in the last year, come to Canada. So this is a European bass that stayed European for most of its life. So what does it need? What they all do. A neck reset. Again with the Hofners and the neck resets. Yes, we've been through this, and no, I'm not the first person to try it. I'm always coming back after someone else has done the neck reset that failed. And yes, I said I'd be crazy to do another one of these. And yes, I always lose money on them because I undercharge and they have frustrating surprises. Still, this is a good way to spend a couple of days, so let's get into it. Okay, this is perhaps the coolest part of the whole bass, and I'm kind of sad that half of it's missing here. I think it was picked off. I don't think that's honest belt wear. For whatever reason, there is a distinct localized culture in Europe surrounding Disney characters, which is different from what's over here in North America, specifically the comics. In Italy, post-war, they started up something called Topolino, which is a comic magazine, and there were translations in various other places. But for whatever reason, the extended family of Donald Duck has its own lore over there, has its own storylines and artists, and it's just loved in a way that kind of defies description. And this sticker here is 1968 copyright Walt Disney Productions. So we're missing the good part of Scrooge McDuck. But I think it's, I mean, I would never pull that off there. That should stay with the base. So why the neck reset? Well, of course, the action is not great. The saddle is bottomed out. Now we could take more material off the bridge base. That's one alternative in a situation like this. But, I mean, you can see that this heel is not seated properly in the pocket. And strangely, there's a hunk of binding or something similar in there in the joint. Why? I don't know. Maybe that is to patch up a gap that was left after the attempted glue up, and they're trying to make it look nice. And of course, it wouldn't be a true Hofner if it didn't have a mysterious hole in the end of the heel, extending to who knows where, and quite possibly containing a screw with the head broken off. And remember that this is not a dovetail joint, like you'll find on many other instruments of this ilk. This is like a violin type joint, where there is a pocket which is V-shaped. The heel itself is pushed into the pocket this way. It doesn't lock in except through the use of glue, holding 3 sides or 4 sides of that joint together with contact between the body and the neck. And sometimes that's easy to remove, sometimes it's a real problem. It's almost always a real problem. These bases are a pretty standard short scale length of about 30 inches, but you'll find that your average short set of strings won't work on them because they've got quite a gap between the 0 fret and the string retaining fret, and on this side we have the after length to the tailpiece to consider, which is weird. So you'll often find a strange situation with the strings. Frequently someone will buy a much longer string length, wind as much as they can on, dispensing altogether with the fabric leader, and hoping that the winds don't unwind. It's usually okay on a round wound string like this, but if you try this with flat wounds, which is what Mr. McCartney was using, oftentimes if you clip a string off like that, it'll just unwind the core. So you end up with this completely dead string immediately. As soon as you cut it, you'll hear a skittering sound, and that's it. That's the sound of your bass strings go bye-bye. So, I have ordered a set of appropriate length strings for the Beetle bass. Does that truss rod cavity look a little rough to you? It's not uncommon because it can be very difficult to get appropriate sized tool in there to adjust them, and it's exceptionally difficult if the nut you're trying to adjust is not on the truss rod. Despite not having a truss rod nut, this is strung to pitch currently, and the neck is exceptionally straight. Like, there could be a slight back bow in the center. Yeah, there is a little bit of relief on the upper strings, but I think the thing has actually got a slight back bow, which could affect the adjustments if we lower the string action too much. But that's kind of remarkable to see a bass of this type that's 60 years old that has a really straight neck. I guess that's good. Not that you're going to be playing up here very often, but we are just getting away with the clearance above the pickup. This is the classic staple type pickup. On the treble side it's better. Action at the 12th fret is 7/64 on the bass side and about 6.5 on the, well, just over 6 on the treble, which is not super terrible, but it's not what most people would like. And probing. Yes, this originally would have had a strap button, we assume, but it could also be something to hold the heel into the body. It's hard to say. I don't think there's a screw head in there. I think it actually tapers, so that all seems consistent with a screw hole. We will proceed assuming that that's what it is. This is some kind of fill. The question is, how do I get enough heat into this joint to make the glue juicy? I think I'm going to remove the 17th fret and drill a couple of holes down into this area. I want to be fairly close to the side walls of this tenon. It's going to soak up enough heat from my heat probes to warm the entire area. Yeah, that's the way to go. Frets on these bases look bigger than they are, actually. At this time, wire was pretty small on most models. In this case, about 85 thousandths wide, just over 2 millimeters, and about 36 thousandths tall. So that's like a standard Martin guitar wire these days. I'll heat up the fret that's in front of the body joint and pull it out. The heat probes are foam cutters from hotwirefoamfactory.com. This is the 4-inch model. It's a 035 in their catalog. And I operate them just using the wall wart style DC adapter. I don't use a rheostat system, although you could. And I like the ones from Hotwire Foam Factory. I've tried others, inexpensive ones from Amazon, and these just function better. They don't burn things up as much. They're thinner, and I've had a very good experience with them. They're not really a sponsor, but they have discounted orders for me before, because apparently I've made these very popular. And I appreciate them too. So, I'm going to let the heat soak in for about 10 minutes and then start wiggling. It's been a while. I can feel the outside surfaces are warm to the touch. They're not hot, but they're warm. I'll start manipulating it. Gently. You got to do this gently. I mean, if you try too forcefully, you're going to rip something or tear it. That's no good. It would be difficult to make a pushing device like I use on the standard acoustic guitars because there's no area near the heel to press against. So this is going to be wiggles. Gently, side to side and up and down. Remember, you're levering against what's essentially the back plate down here. So if you push too hard, you're going to push the back right off. So this is what makes it kind of tricky. Another option would be having these leather pads here to press against. Are we opening up a little bit more? Remember, we have glue on both sides of the heel and on its face and on the underside there. So this is locked in. It's a lot of surface area to overcome. I'm getting a decent amount of wiggle now. There is the possibility that one of the heat probes went from the neck into the, I think it's spruce in there, of the neck block. So that could be joining those two parts together slightly like a spike. Okay, I'm going to turn these off now. It's been long enough that I want to let them cool down slightly. And by removing them, I'll also get rid of the chance that those parts are attached. Do a bit more wiggling. Sometimes it takes multiple heats. Naturally, the camera wasn't running when it pulled out. The neck joint area on these bases is pretty fragile. I mean, there's not a lot of meat there on the sides. Like the neck block is amongst the smallest you're going to find in an instrument this size. And they really are depending on the glue to do a whole lot of the heavy lifting here. There's a lot of glue involved. Where is that chip? I would love to put that back, but it's nowhere to be seen. I think it's been open like that since it was fit. Still removing glue from all over. To change the angle at which the neck sits in the pocket, I have to start removing material from the front of the heel. And I do that in the same way that I do when removing material for a standard neck reset. More material has to come off the bottom and gradually taper to nothing at the top. Once the front taper is established, I want the bottom of the heel to contact well with the back of the instrument. So I've got a generous dusting of chalk on that. And I'll press that down in place. That'll show me where it's contacting, where I have to start removing material. So I'll pare that away and then go back and recheck it and pare some more away and recheck, etc. The goal of all of this is to raise the projection at the bridge. Without the huge amount of glue in the pocket, the heel actually fits very loosely in there, so I have to fur out the sides with a couple of pieces of veneer glued in place. After that, I'll use carbon paper in a similar way to the chalk previously. This will show off the tight spots and tell me where I need to remove material. I do that using a file or sandpaper or a little scraper, whatever works. I'm going to try and fix this loose piece of binding. I'm not sure that's the same stuff. Interesting. So, gluing. I spent a bunch of time fitting and scraping and fitting and scraping until I got it as snug and well fit as I could. At the end of the day, this is an open mortise and tenon, and the adhesive is what's holding it together, right? From a repair perspective, a dovetail would be much easier to deal with. But in the factory assembly situation, this was probably faster. I mean, they really buttered up the parts and used the glue as a gap filler. In the 50s, it was hide glue with some modifiers. By 1965 here, it's aliphatic resin, like PVA or Titebond, which is what I've used again. The end grain surface of the neck block gets so completely soaked in the glue the first time that it's doubtful anything is really going to make a good bond there. So the front side really relies on the parts butting up against each other really tightly so they can't tip. But the cheeks are much more closely fit to each other than they did at Hofner. There was literally a millimeter of glue between the parts in some areas. In some ways, you'd almost prefer to use epoxy for this job. It would make more sense, but it's so irreversible that that's not responsible. I've set the plane of the neck so that it's about 3.5 millimeters higher off the surface of the soundboard than previous. That should give us room for good action and a little bit more adjustment. There are limits. You know, this is a fully hollow base, and if we jack the bridge height up too much, we can increase the tension on the top to the point where it's going to distort. And we don't really want it to collapse, right? So we also don't want to get too high above the pickups. So this is held together with one clamp and one band clamp, and we'll let it sit for a while. The fret goes back from whence it came. And no, the controls need cleaning. Actually, let's plug it in first. I suspect this neck pickup is non-functional. Oh no, it functions, it's just very dirty. It's difficult to flip this thing over without disengaging the bridge ground. There's not a whole lot of extra wire in there. These bases didn't originally come with strap buttons. They had something that was sort of like a dog leash that clipped onto the tailpiece. I'm going to put the truss rod nut on, but mostly for appearance's sake, because the neck is so straight. Yeah, I got some labella, deep talking bass, perfectly balanced set, some interesting gauges for the Hofner Beetle bass. Nothing ever fits I am literally going to have to take this thing apart to file this D-string slot open a little bit, because the string winds won't go through there. Back to the slightly uncommon situation for a bass of this age. This has been strung up for a couple of days because I wanted to see what the neck would do. When it arrived, it had been tuned down for a while. You remember that this was slightly backbowed, and I wanted to see if that would pull out under tension, and it hasn't. With the action set at a really nice height, I'm getting a little bit of buzz on frets 3 and 4, which is classic for a neck with too little relief in it. So the frets on this are still full height. They're 40 thousandths tall. So I can dress down frets 5 and 6, which are acting like a hump, and essentially plane the relief into the fret tops. It's only going to take 4 or 5 thousandths of an inch, just enough. And again, this is the kind of thing that shows up when you lower the action to reasonable levels on guitars that have really high action, you know? You discover all the secrets in the frets. And fret 8 under the D string is also a bit high. Right, the next thing. The radius of the strings on the bridge is not great when compared to the radius of the fretboard. In other words, the inside strings are sitting lower to the board than the outside ones, meaning I have to raise the whole thing up higher than I'd really want to get it to play cleanly. The pieces of fret wire used as saddles are pretty worn. I think I have to replace those. They've worn through to the point where the strings are basically sitting on the wood. This bridge, as it arrived, was installed backwards on the guitar. There's a little hole here for a pin that originally supported the pickguard, which is no longer with the instrument. I mark the saddle positions with some pencil, and these are usually very loosely held in place. Yeah, they come right out. I'm probably going to have to file the tangs of the replacement. I'll clean up the end of a length of fret wire. I made a quick little sizing jig here so they all be the same length. The fit is too tight, so I'll file material off the barbs. To create a more appropriate radius, I'll lower the outside saddles a little bit by filing and then recrowning. Nice. It's as good as I can get it. I will say the electronics in this one are very much par for the course as far as old Hofners go. The switching scheme is a bit weird to begin with, and frequently things go wrong. The switches tend to fail. There are little resistors wired in series in various places. They can be noisy. The thing is, these components are rare, and finding exact replacements can be very difficult. There are some companies who make pre-wired replacements for the whole package, the plate, the switches, and everything. And in some cases, if you were going to play one of these as a daily driver, that might be the way to go. Just remove the original, put it in the case for posterity, and upgrade it. But the collectability ethics get involved, you know. Do you try and cobble something together that will get you by, or do you just start fresh and make it work right? The other thing is, these 60s staple pickups are kind of renowned for dying because of internal corrosion caused by, there was an acidic component in the flux that they used when assembling them. Over time, it eats through the insulation, and in many cases they end up silent or compromised to the point where they have to be rewound. So it's one of these philosophical case studies, you know, originality versus usability. We'll plug it in and see what it's like.